Hello and welcome back to The Critique. Today we're looking at a draft advocacy guide from a listener. And, well, to be honest, it's pretty shocking. They've been living in a lookout housing shelter and waiting 3 years for help getting a basic government ID.
3 years. It's hard to even wrap your head around that. You'd think getting an ID would be, I don't know, the very first thing they do. Step one, right?
Exactly. Step one. And this guide isn't just a complaint. The listener is building this really comprehensive case to prove this is a systemic failure, using the organization's own data against them.
Yeah, and I have to say, the raw material here is fantastic. I mean, the research is solid, but, and it's a big but, it reads a little too much like a moral argument. You know, this is wrong, you should help me.
And that's not enough.
It's true, but it's not enough. Moral arguments don't really move bureaucrats. We need to shift this from this is wrong to this is a contractual liability.
Okay, so let's dive right in. The core of their argument hinges on this. Just massive statistical gap. Lookout's own annual report says the average stay is 31 days. Our listener is at 1,095.
It's a staggering contrast. 31 days versus, well, 3 years.
Right. So the argument in the draft is basically, look at this gap. I'm here 35 times longer than average. That proves you've neglected me. And it feels like a slam dunk.
It feels like one for sure. But, let's play devil's advocate here. If I'm an administrator and you slide that across my desk, what's my first move?
I don't know. What is it?
I'm going to say, well, of course you've been here longer. Your case is complex. They'll say that 31-day average includes people who stay one night and leave. It's apples and oranges.
You think they can just dismiss it that easily? Just by saying the average is, diluted?
Oh, 100%. They'll just label the listener an outlier, and poof, the argument's gone. They'll say, the average doesn't apply to you, your needs are higher. It's the perfect escape hatch.
Okay, so how do we close that hatch? How do we make that 3-year timeline really stick?
We have to stop talking about time. Time is their turf. We need to start talking about money. We pivot this whole thing from a comparison of days to a comparison of resource allocation.
Okay, walk me through that.
So look at the contract they operate under, the Emergency Shelter Program, or ESP. That's what funds the bed. And that funding isn't just for a mattress. It specifically mandates gateway services.
Gateway services, like getting an ID.
Exactly. Referrals, support, ID recovery, that is what the government is literally buying with that funding.
Ah, okay. So the shelter is paid specifically to do this exact work?
Precisely. So instead of saying, I've been here 35 times longer, the argument becomes, your funding model assumes a full cycle of case management happens every 31 days.
I see.
So if the average guest is in and out in a month, that means the shelter has been funded for 35 distinct cycles of service, while our listener has just been waiting.
Oh, wow. That completely changes the frame. It's not, I've waited a long time. It's, you've been paid to help me 35 separate times and haven't.
Exactly. It becomes a financial question. You can literally ask, if you're funded to provide case management for the average guest in 31 days, where did the funding for the other 1,064 days of my stay go?
That's a heavy question. It implies the money for the service was taken, but the service wasn't delivered.
It hints at a misappropriation of funds, which is a much, much scarier thing for an administrator than just being called slow.
You need to cite the specific clause, Section 2.1.2 of the ESP obligations. Make them see that every 31 days is another check they cashed for work they didn't do.
Yeah, that definitely shuts down the complex case excuse. No case is so complex it takes 35 funding cycles just to fill out a form.
Right.
Unless the complexity is that they just aren't doing the work.
Okay, let's move on to the next section in the guide. The listener calls it magic words. They've correctly identified that you need to use the right bureaucratic language. So they're using terms like case plan and gateway services.
And it's a smart instinct, You have to speak their language, but I think they're being a little too polite.
Too polite? Case plan sounds pretty official to me.
To us, maybe, but think about a shelter worker's day. It's just chaos. They're overworked, underpaid, putting out fires. A client comes up and says, I'd like an individualized case plan. and all they hear is, here's a bunch more paperwork for you. It's what I'd call a soft target.
So how do you harden it? How does case plan go from being like homework to being, I don't know, a subpoena?
You have to tie it to the audit. We need to elevate this whole thing from a service request to a compliance failure.
Compliance failure. Okay, that sounds like something to get to manager's attention.
It's something that gets funding reviewed, which is even worse for them. See, the operator Lookout has to report outcomes to BC Housing. They have these really strict performance metrics. And one of those is almost always percentage of clients offered a case plan or something about housing outcomes.
So no ID means no housing. No housing means the shelter stats look bad.
Bingo. You have to connect those dots for them. Don't just ask for a plan. You state very clearly, my lack of ID after 3 years is negatively impacting your required reporting metrics on housing outcomes.
Wow, so you're basically telling them, I am a problem for your next report.
You're telling them I am dragging down your numbers. You should even ask to see the record of interventions completed in their official database, the BC Housing Homelessness Services System. Ask them, when the auditor pulls my file, what interventions for ID will they see over the last 1,095 days?
That is a terrifying question for a staff member who knows the answer is nothing.
It is. And it shifts the whole motivation. Now they're not helping you because they're nice. They're helping you because they don't want a giant red flag on their next performance review.
Which leads perfectly to the next point, the staffing excuse. The guide predicts staff will just say, sorry, we're short-staffed.
The classic defense. And to be fair, a lot of the time it's probably true.
The listener's current rebuttal in the draft is, well, it's pretty aggressive. It says something like, staffing is your problem, not mine. You get paid millions, so do your job.
Oof. Yeah, I actually cringed when I read that.
But it's factually correct, isn't it?
It's 100% true, but it's strategically a disaster. The second you say that to an overworked caseworker, they shut down. They will do the absolute bare minimum, but they will not lift an extra finger for you. You've made an adversary right when you need an ally.
So how do you push back on that excuse without, making them hate you?
You shift the blame upwards. You take the heat off the individual person standing in front of you, and you put it squarely on the agency's standards.
Okay, give me an example.
The listener's research found that Lookout is very proud of its COR accreditation. That's a Certificate of Recognition for Safety. And they want some kind of award for diversity and inclusion.
So you use their own trophies against them?
You use them as the standard they set for themselves. Instead of saying you're lazy, you say, given Lookout's COR accreditation and your commitment to trauma-informed care, a 3-year delay suggests a serious gap in the agency's monitoring and plan review protocols.
That sounds so professional. It sounds like you're an auditor.
Exactly. You frame it as, look, I know you want to help, but clearly the agency's advocacy and accommodation system is failing here. You make it about the system, not the person.
And you can bring the money back into this part too, can't you? The budget covers staffing.
You absolutely can. The BC Housing contract specifically covers salaries and benefits. So you can frame it as advocacy and accompaniment to Service BC is a prepaid service I have not yet received. It completely depersonalizes it. It's not about Dave the caseworker having a bad day. It's about the agency failing to deliver a paid-for service.
A prepaid service. I like that. It's like an Amazon package that never showed up.
That is exactly what it is.
Okay, so let's say all of this, for some reason, fails. The draft has an escalation path. The final step is contacting the minister or an MLA.
The so-called nuclear option.
It feels like the biggest weapon you have, right? I'm gonna tell the government. But you weren't a fan of this. Why not?
Because honestly, politicians are mostly useless for this kind of specific problem. I mean, a letter to the Minister of Housing gets sent to a correspondence unit, it gets logged, you might get a form letter back in 6 weeks. It's just way too slow.
So, if the minister is the slow route, what's the fast one?
The auditor. Or, more specifically, the threat of an operational review.
Explain that. What's an operational review?
So, BC Housing conducts these reviews of every shelter, usually every 3 years. They come in, they check the books, they audit client files, they make sure everything is compliant. If a shelter fails, they can get hit with a compliance order, which is an absolute nightmare for management.
So instead of threatening to call a politician, you threaten to become a problem for their next audit.
Yes. In the consequences part of the letter, you explicitly list operational reviews. You say something like, this ongoing failure to provide mandatory gateway services represents a critical incident that I will be documenting for the next BC Housing Operational Review.
That feels so much more direct. A manager knows exactly what that is and fears it.
It also shows you know how the system works. You can even mention the surplus and deficit management clause. Imply that if they haven't spent the staff time on you, they might be holding on to a surplus that should have been used for client services.
It's hitting them where they live, bureaucratically speaking, instead of making a long-distance call to Victoria.
Precisely.
Now, I want to circle back to the numbers for a second. There's a specific critique you had about the financial data. The listener quotes Lookout's total revenue, which is something like $49–50 million.
Right. And they also mention a general per-bed estimate of $40,000 to $60,000.
And that big number, 50 million, seems really powerful. It's like, you have all this money and you can't help me. But you're saying that's actually a mistake.
It's a mistake because it's sloppy. A good manager will hear that and immediately dismiss you. They'll say that $50 million is for the entire organization, dozens of sites. I don't see that money here. You don't understand our budget. It gives them an out.
So you have to be precise. You need the budget for the actual building they're in.
You need to be laser precise. If the listener is at the Pauline shelter, they need to use the $1.37 million annualized operating funding figure. That's the number for that roof.
And if they're at a different one, like the Suma's shelter.
That one's bigger. It's a $15.5 million contract. But here's the real killer move. You break it down to the cost per bed.
And how does that math work out?
Well, for a place like the Sumas shelter, when you divide the funding by the number of beds, it comes out to roughly $87,600 per bed, per year.
Wait, $87,000 a year? That's more than a lot of people make.
It is. Now, let's apply that to our listeners' situation. They've been there for 3 years.
So, 3 times 87,000.
It's over $260,000.
That is unbelievable.
Just think about that. The province has spent over $250,000 to keep this one person in one shelter bed. That's a massive, massive investment.
And for 3 years, that $250,000 investment has been completely paralyzed because
nobody would spend $50 and a couple of hours of staff time to get them a piece of plastic.
When you frame it like that, it's not just negligence. It's financial insanity.
It's absurd. And that is the argument that cannot be ignored. You're not just a person in need anymore. You're a glaring example of wasted tax dollars. You put that in the letter. The province has invested over $260,000 in my shelter stay. Yet the $50 task of securing my ID remains incomplete, rendering that entire investment useless.
That is the mic drop. There is no manager on earth who can read that sentence and not feel a cold sweat. It's not about helping you anymore. It's about plugging a massive, embarrassing hole in their budget.
Exactly. It makes their refusal to help look, frankly, fiscally irresponsible.
So, to recap this whole overhaul, the raw material is there, the passion is there, but we need to sharpen the arguments into bureaucratic weapons.
First, we anchor that 31-day stat to the gateway services funding. It's not that you've stayed too long. It's that you've been funded 35 times over without service.
Second, we stop asking nicely. We use their own language, performance metrics, housing outcomes, to make this a compliance issue they can't ignore.
Third, we get the staff on our side by aiming higher. It's not their fault. It's a failure of the agency to live up to its own COR accreditation and trauma-informed promises.
And finally, and maybe most importantly, we use surgically precise numbers. We calculate that total cost per bed investment, that incredible $260,000 figure, to show the sheer financial absurdity of the situation.
If you write those letters with that level of precision, you're not just another client with a problem. You are a risk management issue. And risk management issues get solved fast.
That's the goal. We'd invite the listener to rewrite these templates with that specific language. And please, send us an update. We would love to hear how quickly things move when they realize you know exactly how the money works.
I have a feeling it'll be very, very quickly.
Thanks for listening to The Critique. We'll see you next time.